video and we are live. Um, we're live with our Patreons and also Patreons of the Prosecutors Podcast and members of their galleries. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And then, once I get done with the intro, we'll just go ahead and get rolling.
Okay.
And what I normally do, Vangie, just so you know, I put a quote at the top of the episode. So I'm going to just say, your name for the quote, then I'll get into the intro. So,
Okay.
all right. Okay. So that's Vangie Randall-Shorty, whose son, Zach, went missing and was found murdered in 2020 in an unsolved case in New Mexico.
Enter frontier.
This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Since the death of her son, Zach, Vangie Randall-Shorty has been advocating for him and other families of missing and murdered Indigenous people and their relatives. Before July 21st, 2020, Vangie and her family lived a quiet life in New Mexico. But on that day, Zach, who went by Dewan, and his friends took a trip to the Journey Inn in Farmington, New Mexico to record music. Vangie came by that day to drop off pizza, but at some point, Zach disappeared from the inn and was never seen alive again. 4 days later, on July 25th, Zach's body was found on a dirt path in a field almost 15 miles away in another part of New Mexico. He had been shot multiple times. His killer or killers have yet to be identified. During a journey that almost no parent can imagine, Vangie learned that she's not alone, especially among Native people. When Zach went missing, she didn't know what to do, had no resources, and didn't know who to ask. She and her family put together their own search party. Eventually, law enforcement became involved in the case, and when his body was found, no one even told her of his location or what happened until she received the death certificate and the medical examiner's report. For the last 4 years, Vangie has been battling authorities in the Navajo Nation and with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which investigates murders on tribal lands, over a lack of communication in Zach's case. The Navajo Nation currently has 96 of its residents who are missing, and on a recent episode with a Native attorney, I said that if 97 cats, or 96 cats, were missing in Connecticut, it would be on the front page of the New York Times. But cases like Zach's get little media coverage. That changed when Vangie met the family of Gabby Petito, a 22-year-old white woman who went missing and was found dead in Wyoming, presumably killed by her boyfriend. At first, the Petito family hated the phrase missing white woman syndrome, a concept that suggests the news media and content creators are more likely to pay attention to and provide coverage when a victim is young, white, considered conventionally attractive, and a woman. It's not just the media or content creators. I can remember raising the issue on a discussion board about the 2022 University of Idaho murders and having my comment deleted by a moderator. When I wrote the moderator with the media and journalism school research on the topic, they agreed with me on the point, but just replied, "We don't talk about social issues." And those of us who have podcasts that cover issues related to Indigenous people know that each time we do, our downloads drop. So it's not the media simply not caring, but it's the media responding to the simple fact that the general public has a hard time caring, loving, and being passionate about natives as opposed to people who look like them and have similar experiences to them. Now the Petito family, Vangie, and others have joined forces to rail against the concept so we can find justice for all people who are victims of crimes, regardless of the color of their skin or their ethnic origin. Today, we're going to discuss Zach's life, his death, the search for him and the investigation, the challenges Native families find themselves in under these circumstances, and what the rest of us can do to use our voices when it comes to politicians and the police, and our ears and eyes when it comes to creators and the media to do a better job. Vangie, I just wanted to thank you for joining. We came across each other at Crime Con. I guess it's now just a couple weeks ago. And I had, the Petito family, you, Darlene Gomez, who's an attorney, were on the stage talking about missing and murdered Indigenous people. And certainly you were talking about advocacy and I think issues that were really important. But I was really just struck by your son's story. It sort of combined almost all of what we hear in many of these cases in terms of, you know, the tragic death, the disappearance, but the lack of resources for families, the lack of resources, the cross jurisdictional or not cross jurisdictional, but multiple agency issues. And, so all my friends went to the bar and I went through the hallway searching to find you. And I'm really glad. I'm glad I was able to connect. So thanks. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. I, one of the things when we do episodes on people who have died, we often talk about, their death, the crime, the immediate part that led up to it. But we don't often, we focus on the investigation and what follows, but we don't often focus on the life of the person who's lost. And I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about Zach, your family, and what life was like for you all before this happened.
We live, here in Kirtland, New Mexico, and this is where I raised my kids. Zach, was born in Farmington, raised here, lifetime residence. And my Zach's dad, my ex-husband now, was a truck driver. So, he was always gone. I was home raising the kids. I started out as a preschool teacher so that I could, be able to have my kids there with me and still, still work, help with income and things like that. As a kid, Zach was a very happy kid. He throughout elementary, loved playing chess, joined a little chess club, joined Yaffle football as he was growing up. So, we were very. Go ahead.
That's the middle school football. That's the. Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm. So he joined, football, I believe 2 or 3 years, and he wasn't that tall, but he was husky as a kid, and they had him. I'm not quite sure what the positions are, but they had him up in front and center.
On the line, a lineman. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was very good at what he did because, he was up against all these tall kids, these big kids, and he could still, hold the line and protect the quarterback. So, yeah. And I remember there was a game where he caught the ball and he ran all the way down and he sort of touched down, and I was so proud of him. I was up in the stands screaming, yelling, that's my baby, that's my baby. It was a very proud moment for me. And so, as he continued growing up, he grew up in a household with two siblings, a brother and a sister. They were very, very close, and also close in age. And he was a really good kid. He was a second grandchild on his dad's side of the family. So he was the first grandson on that side. And yeah, and so, but he had a very close bond with both grandparents, my mom and grandpa and grandma on his dad's side. He was very, sarcastic, always, smiling, laughing, joking around. He went to school in Kirtland for a little bit, then in Farmington. he got into some trouble. As parents, we can only do so much. They do so good when they're in your presence, but then they get into school and um,
Yes,
they
I
get
feel my mother felt the same way.
yeah, and so he got involved with some of the wrong friends, and just kind of started from there.
How old is he then? Just again,
Um, he was in junior high,
sure.
yeah, and that's the first time we had dealt with probation, drug court,
Mm.
grade court, that which helped him stay on the right path, and then
So those things actually did help him, you feel?
it did help him for a little bit, and then
Mm.
he became an adult, and also losing his brother. His brother
Yeah.
was in an auto accident, and he had died at the scene. Um,
How long ago was that?
that was 8 years ago,
Mm.
and we got the phone call about 3 p.m. Said the kids were in an accident, which was my oldest son Christian, um, the mother of his child, and
Mhm.
her son, and so I assumed that they were at the hospital, and I just remember hanging up the phone and telling Zach and his dad, Christian was in an accident, let's go. So we immediately left and got to San Juan Regional in Farmington, and I went in there. Where's my son? Where's
Mm.
my son? Nobody knew what was going on, and just blanks of like, what are you talking about? Um, and then I got another phone call that said, Christian had passed, and I'm like, no, no, where is he? And it clicked that they were still at the accident scene. So
Mm.
I
He never made it to the hospital.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I found the location of the accident scene. I seen him there. I told Zach, stay in the truck, stay in the truck. He didn't listen. Everything happened so fast. I went
It
out.
was his oldest brother, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I saw Christian. Talked to the officers. They wouldn't let me touch him,
Mm.
and Zach was standing behind me, so Zach saw his brother, and which caused a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
He was 17 at the time, and then
How, how did that loss affect him from your perspective?
oh god, it hit him hard. He became alcohol drug dependent. He became suicidal.
Mm.
Um, he started playing music to express himself with the loss of his brother and with his addictions.
Mm.
And Christian, they talked about being home for Christmas together. That didn't happen. Christian died December 14, 2015, and never made it home for Christmas. That, and then, for Zach's graduation, he graduated the following May in 2016 and was expecting,
His
a
big
baby.
brother to be there, yeah. Oh, he
Yeah,
was
and
expecting a baby too.
yes, and
Mm.
so Zach is a dad, and she was born in January 2016, so a month after Christian had passed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that
Wow.
was a lot on Zach, and he he took it hard, and I was hoping and praying that his daughter would change change that mindset, but we his addictions took over.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
addiction is so powerful, and
it
it's
is.
so easy to think if you haven't experienced it that something like I don't know, a marriage, a child, something would cause someone to change, but I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding because in all of my work and conversations with people, I haven't met a lot of addicts who want to be an addict. They're not having fun. Um, it's not simply a choice to get out of it once you go into that spiral. And I'm sorry for your loss of both of your sons.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Zach was also a tattoo artist.
Oh,
And
really? Oh, cool.
yeah, so I supported him and things that he did. So I have a few tattoos on myself as well. We have matching tattoos.
Oh,
But as far as jobs, he his first job he worked at Wendy's, and then after that he became a tire technician just across the highway from where we live in Kirtland. And so he would change the tires of the semi trucks, the 18 wheelers,
mhm.
and he was really good at it. He enjoyed what he did, and he would time himself to be better, because the the drivers needed just to be out quick and to get on the road. And so Zach would time himself. But like I said, his addiction started getting the best of him. He lost his job. He stayed home for about a year, and then he went back to work, and he went to work at Speedway in Kirtland, about
This is
3 minutes.
around 2019,
2000,
18,
2020
20,
is when he
2020.
started working at Speedway,
Okay.
and he was there for a few months. And he seemed to enjoy it, but it wasn't. I don't know what happened. Like I said, his addictions got the best of him. He tried to stay clean. He tried to stay sober. Um, and he just it just
Too
overcame.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you would think, it's already hard enough, once you fall into an addiction to stay sober, but also to have a trauma like that at the same time, even on its own without addiction, it's very
Hmm.
difficult to it's a lot to carry for a young man.
Hmm.
Um, did he have aspirations in your end? You mentioned a couple things like he was a tattoo artist and he was into music. It sounds like he was really creative. Did he have any aspirations, that sort of went beyond what he was doing?
He used to talk about getting a recording for his music, and there were some local people that were interested in becoming his producer. And um, I'm not sure why he didn't jump on it, but he used to tell me all the time, everybody's gonna know Zach Shorty, and through his music.
No. Did t- I'm just curious about the day that Zach disappeared. I mean, it sounded like it was a relatively normal day for you all. How'd that day start out? And how did you
Um,
find out he was missing?
um, so I'm gonna start on the 19th, the day before he went missing. On the 19th, which was on a Monday, um, Zach. It was a normal day. I work Monday to Friday. His dad was a dialysis patient, so um, he was home, but Zach had left. Zach left and went to the Journey Inn, and where he said he was gonna make some music with his friends.
Okay.
Um, and I checked in with him throughout the daytime. He was fine. Everything was good. He called me very late that night, Monday night, or it was early. It was actually early Tuesday morning. And so I woke his dad up and I said, Zach needs to get picked up. You want to come with me? And, and then plus being the fact that it was at the Journey Inn where, it's not a good place to be. And I didn't
Where do you
want him
say that? What do you say
Uh,
that?
I say that because, you know, people who are users, they hang out there. You know, um, people go there to drink, do whatever.
Hmm. So it
But
was sort of known as a place that could, where you could find trouble, get into trouble.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, his dad went with me, and we picked him up. We picked him up with his friend, a female friend of his,
Okay.
and he says, can she come home? And I said, no, she can't come home with you. Being the fact that when they're together and they're both under the influence, they argue. So,
Mm,
and so this was early Tuesday morning, and then I had to be at work. His dad was going to dialysis, so nobody was going to be home with the two of them. And
mm.
I said, no, that, I said, no.
You were
So,
concerned that something could go wrong and there'd be no one there to bring it down.
yeah,
Yeah.
to defuse it, yes. And so then they were talking amongst themselves in the back seat of the car, and then they, said, well, can you drop us off on Troy King? And that's between Farmington and between Journey and home in Kirtland.
Mm,
So we dropped them off there, and um, and that was it. So it was about 5 a.m. We got home. I went back to bed. Got up about an hour later, and his dad went to dialysis, and I was getting ready for work when Zach called me, and he says, Mom, can you pick me up? I said, okay, sure, I can pick you up. Are you ready? He says, yeah, I'm ready. I said, and then he asked me if he could bring his friend home with him, and I said, no. I said,
so
no, I'm
that's
not going
the second time, right?
to.
That's
Yes,
the
same
okay,
female.
second time he's called to ask you to pick him up, and
Mhm.
yeah.
Same female. And so I
Okay.
said, no. And then he says, well, let me call you back, in a few minutes. I continued getting ready for work, and this is Tuesday morning on the 21st of July, 2020. And he called me back, and he says, well, can you take us to the Journey Inn and drop us off? And I said, okay. And he had a court that day as well. So I said, don't forget you have court. He says, okay. So I left home. I picked them up on the way, which was en route, dropped them both off at the Journey Inn, and reminded him, Juwan, you have court today. Don't miss it.
Mm,
And please be careful. I love you. I'll see you later. I
okay.
dropped them both off. They both went inside room 129 of the Journey Inn in Farmington. I was texting Zach throughout the day, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And he called me about 3 p.m. and he said, Mom, my battery died. He called me from a different number.
Mm,
So there was, I found out there was two females in the room and two other males in the room.
okay.
So he called me from one of the males' phone. Um, he's deceased now, so I'll just use his name. His name is Kyle.
Okay.
So he called me from Kyle's phone, and he says, Mom, my phone died. Do you have a charger that I could use? I said, yes, I do. So I, dropped everything. I took it to him. He was about 5 minutes away. Dropped it off. He came out, and I could see that he was intoxicated already. I gave him the charger, and I made sure, and I told him, be careful, please, be careful. Again, I love you. And then I watched him go back into the room, and I made sure he went back in.
Hmm.
I went back to work, and before leaving, I also told him I get off at 6. If you need me to pick you up, I'll pick you up. I went back to work, and 6 p.m. comes, and I called him multiple times before coming home, and he didn't answer.
Mm,
Uh, the Journey Inn is in my route, so I drove by. I didn't see him, hanging out outside. I figured he was recording. So I went home. I went home to Kirtland. I didn't make it inside. I stayed on the back porch and I was cleaning it off. And about 7:50, so 6:45, 7 o'clock, he calls me and he says, "Mom, we're hungry. Can you, yeah, can you bring us some pizza?" And I said, "Sure." He also asked where I was, and I said, "I'm home." So I left home and went back into Farmington to the Little Caesars and got him pizza. And he called me while I was there and he says, "Mom, where are you at?" I said, "I'm paying for the food. I'll be there in a few." And then he says, "Can you pick up Kyra?" That's the female that was
Woman
that,
who had been there before.
yeah. So I said, "I thought Kyra was with you. What the heck? Where is she at?" And so he said she was at the Economy Hotel,
So
Economy
another
Inn.
nearby hotel. Yeah.
Mhm. So I picked her up there, and then we went to the Dollar Tree to get some sodas. And she went in, got the drinks, came back out, and we went to the Journey Inn. And I pulled
Did you
up.
see him that last time, or?
Yeah. So I picked up, after picking up Kyra, getting the sodas, we went back to the Journey Inn. I pulled up to the hotel, and Zach was standing outside the hotel room, and he was on the phone. He was on the phone with the mother of his child, and he was telling her that he loves her and that he wanted to make things work. They were
Oh,
in
wow.
and out of relationship because of his addictions, and so he was begging her, and Kyra stepped out of the vehicle and heard that conversation. And I remember glancing at her, and her whole face demeanor just changed, like, like, what the hell,
She couldn't believe.
yeah.
So they were in a relationship,
So
at least in her mind.
in her mind, yeah, she's in a relationship, and it was very temporary because um, she had access to drugs. She had access to the alcohol. So she thought at that moment she was in a relationship with Zach. So stepping out of the car and hearing that conversation, she was like, "What the hell?" Like,
It had to be shocking for her, and
yeah,
then to also hear it in front of you, and
yeah. And so Zach, you know, just told her to go inside the room. And she went inside the hotel room. And I approached Zach, and he says, "Mom, can you talk to her?" He gives me the phone, and he's got the mother of his child on the other line. And he says, "Can you talk to her? You know, help me." And so I took his phone and I said, "I'm here." Um, no, he's not, no, he's not in his right state of mind. He's under the influence. And so I said, "Let me call you, let me talk to him and I'll call you back." So I gave the phone back to Zach, and he hung up. He hung up the phone, and I told Zach, I said, "I brought you pizza." I was trying to make his mood better,
Mhm.
and I said, "I brought you pizza. I brought you some sodas, why don't you eat something?" And then I asked him if he wanted to come home, and he said he was not ready. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." Um, that was the last time.
Last thing.
That was the last time that I even told him that I love him, that I hugged him. I told him to be careful, and I told him to call me when he's ready to come home.
Hmm.
Um,
You never know, right? Every time
yeah,
we see someone we love, you never know if it's going to be the last
yes.
time.
Yeah. Um, I left. I left, and I went home. Um, I went home. I called him to see if he was ready. He didn't answer. Um, I went to bed, and
So this is late
then,
on Tuesday.
so that was
Mhm.
it was after 7 when I left him
Right.
at the hotel, and I
Do you
went home.
remember? Do you remember when you got the call? How did you
Yeah, it
find
was.
out? Yeah.
So I got a call from Kyra through Facebook Messenger to my phone from
Mm,
her Facebook Messenger,
okay.
and it was about 11. It was about 11, and she says Zach stepped out of the hotel room and didn't come back in. He went out to smoke a cigarette.
Hmm.
Um, I said, can you go look for him? And she says, yes, I'll go look for him. And I said, then call me back. So we hung.
How long had he been gone? How long did she say he had been gone by then? Because it's a kind of interesting thing to me to. It would probably take a lot of time for most people to call someone's mother to say they had stepped out of the
Yeah,
hotel.
she didn't say how long it was. But as soon as I got off the phone with her, I called Zach's phone, and
Mm-hmm.
she answered.
Oh
She
wow.
answered his, and so then I asked her. I said, "Is he back?" And she said, "No." She said, "No, he's not back. He left his
So he had
phone, and it
left without his phone.
yeah." And so that was my first red flag.
Yep.
Um, when I got off the phone with her, I immediately, called his phone, and then I woke his dad up, and I said, "Zach didn't get back in the room. We need to go look for him."
Something's
The
wrong.
like I said, the
Yeah.
first red flag. Yeah, and so we took our vehicles. We drove up to the journey and I called Kyra and I said, "Is he back?" I was calling her on while en route. "Is he back? Did you find him?" She said, "No." I said, "Stay there because I'm picking you up."
So the fact that
Um,
his phone was still there, he wasn't there, sort of filled you with a
hmm
sense of dread, right?
hmm
Your
So I picked her
instincts
up.
told you, yeah.
Yeah, I picked her up and we started driving around the journey and his dad was doing the same thing up and down Apache Street. It's not it's There's the Farmington Police Department right up the road from there. You go straight down, there's the San Juan Regional Hospital, which is like 2 streets down. So we were driving around and then we were rushing back from Farmington to Kirtland, which is home, throughout the night to see if he's walking along the highway. I was even walking the park, which is near the journey in, and I had Kyra with me the whole time, looking for
So you guys
Zach.
are
And
searching throughout the night? The
mhm,
ha- uh, at what point did law enforcement become involved? Was it that night or was it later?
no, no, it
Okay.
was until later.
Okay.
Um, so that was Tuesday night. So we get home early Wednesday morning. I get home to stay home throughout the day to wait for Zach to come home. His
Right.
dad continued the search throughout the daytime. I
Okay.
had posted on Facebook, have you seen my baby boy? And so I did this long Facebook post um, to try to find him. And then, so I stayed home Wednesday. His dad came back that evening or that night, and then we switched out. So I
Had
was
that
out all night.
had things like that happened before where he had sort of disappeared for periods of time? Because
No,
I'm just yeah, yeah. I was just
no, no,
curious about whether this is for you, this was unusual at this point.
no, you know. And Zach was a mama's boy. He after losing Christian, I became very overprotective,
Mm-hmm.
and um,
What do you
you
mean by
know
that?
I needed to know where he was. I needed to know who he was with,
Mm.
when he's coming home, when he's leaving, things like that.
And he knew
I
you'd
was
feel better if you knew those things, so
yeah. And there
he
was a
knew.
time where he did not answer, because he was hanging out with friends and, of course, drinking and using. And so he decided to ignore my phone calls. And so I texted him. I was like, you better answer me because I will come and hunt your ass down, and
Sounds like
which
the
I've
kind of
done
thing my
before
mom.
as well. Yes.
It's the kind of thing my mom would do.
Yeah. And then I also texted him. I said, if you want me to quit harassing you, you better let me know where you're at, who you're with, and when you'll be home. At least let me know that you're okay. That's all I need to know. I need to know you're okay. I need to hear your voice. And so after that, then Zach, he would answer me and he would respond. If I'm calling him at 2 a.m., I'm just checking in, he would answer his phone.
And so you guys continued the search throughout, I guess, Wednesday. At what
Yeah,
point
Wednesday we switched out.
can I ask? Is there a reason why you didn't call the authorities earlier? You just thought he was going to show up, or you just
I
didn't know what to
I
do?
thought he was going to show up, and then on top of that, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I was always told you have a certain amount of time before you make a police report.
Mm, the old untruth that you have to wait 48 hours or whatever it
Yes.
is. Yeah,
Yep.
right. Right. It's a lot of
So
people don't know that that's not necessarily true. It's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It depends on, whether the person is young, whether they're a drug addict, whether they're old,
mhm,
and I think that's actually a good myth to point out to people as well, that the 48 hours is not necessarily true.
yeah, it's not. I found out, but
Mm.
I went throughout the night, Wednesday night, while his dad stayed home. Thursday morning, his dad went to dialysis again, and I was home. And I remember sitting at the table. I was drinking my coffee, looking out the window, looking at the front door, and just crying like, what am I going to do? What do I do? And at that point, I made a decision to call the police, and I called non-emergency, and I told them I needed to file a missing persons report. That Zach, I couldn't find him, and I hadn't heard from him. So they, directed me to an officer. I was put on the phone with him, and he was asking me, when the last time I had any communication with him, the color of what he was wearing, the color of his eyes, where he's had his dental exams done, and
And this is
cancer.
the tribal police at this point?
No, this was with the Farmington police because that's
Farmington
where he went
police.
missing
Okay.
from.
Okay.
Mhm. Um,
So they were asking
you know,
details
I
about what he looked like, where his dentist was that must have been a weird
mhm.
thing to hear. Like, I'm just trying to
it,
imagine your
it was,
child being missing and then someone asking essentially, where can I find their dental records? That must be
yeah,
frightening.
and I'm like, my response was, why are you asking me all these things? They asked for his weight and his height, and um, and I was just so distraught, with all the questions, and I kept breaking down, and I'm like, I can't believe that I'm answering these.
It sounds like, I mean, I remember you saying when you were at CrimeCon that you sort of felt like your family didn't never sort of contemplated something like this and had no resources at the time that he disappeared. I'm curious, what advice would you have for other families who find themselves in sort of similar situations with a loved one missing?
There were no resources when Zach went missing. After making the police report, they said they would generate a missing flyers report, so a flyer, and they did. I picked it up that evening and went to the journey and then took it around. But that was all they had did, and they put him on their Facebook, their Farmington PD Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't offer any kind of resources as far as a search and rescue or anything like that. And now 4 years later, there is the Four Corners Canine Search and Rescue, who helps families locally. She Bernadine Bial, so she covers the Four Corners area, and
Yeah.
she's found some families.
Loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The if you sort of had it all over again, and I guess this is kind of what I'm getting at with that advice, is there anything that you now know about or that you now know that would have caused you to do something differently then?
Yes. I didn't think to go to that room that night.
Hmm. To
Um,
actually go into it. Yeah.
to go into the room. I didn't think to call the Farmington PD that night.
That night earlier.
I wish I had done that, because he didn't have his phone, and that was the
Be
first red
doing
flag.
that.
Mhm.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
probably at his age, that would have been a red flag for them too, right?
Yes.
Like if you gave his background, how frequently he communicated normally, and that he
Mhm.
stepped outside for a cigarette, and they walk in the room and they see that they're, I don't know, whatever, that their ashtrays full of cigarettes or whatever it is, like that
Mhm.
could have been an opportunity to find out. Is there anything you wish the authorities had done differently? You had mentioned they generated a flyer, they put up a first Facebook page, but it sounds like they weren't involved in the search. Did they work with the other local jurisdictions like the
No.
mm,
The missing persons report was made on Thursday. On Friday, my family and I planned our own search and rescue. So, some of Zach's close friends and one of his teachers came, and family came, and we searched again from the journey and to Kirtland. On Friday, we were
and
unsuccessful.
I remember you had said earlier that after his brother died, he had been suicidal. Were you worried about sort of all possibilities at that point, or were you thinking maybe he harmed himself or he got into an accident or
I
some-
was, all of that came to my mind. And I did, include that during the missing persons when I was, talking to the officer. And so they were supposed to have put Zach in as an endangered missing person.
missing? Yep.
Yeah. And I also asked if, that if they were
Did
going
they? Did
to
they?
back
Did they?
vaccinate.
Did they end up putting him in as an endangered missing person, or did you?
No, they
No.
didn't.
Okay.
And so we had our search party. We were unsuccessful. We looked again Saturday. Um, again, and Saturday we covered up on N36, which is part of the Navajo Nation.
Okay.
We
So
went
you're
up.
expanding your search further from Farmington and more into the
Mhm.
reservation itself. Yeah.
Yep. So we were walking up and down the river as well, because I didn't know where to look. There was a family member who had asked me, Are we looking for Zach or are we looking for a body? And that, got me thinking. I'm like, I'm looking for Zach, and he was like, okay, so why are you looking like, in the like trains and things like that? I kept making phone calls,
So
and
sort of in your mind, you sort of felt like
I felt
you were
like he was,
looking for Zach, but your
yes.
relative was pointing out that your actions were,
Mhm.
you could have been
I was
looking
looking
for
for a
Zach or
body.
a body. You're really looking for a
Mhm.
body. Yeah.
Yep. And so, I snapped and I was like, I'm looking for Zach. And so Saturday, later toward the evening, Kyra started messaging me on Facebook again. And she was telling me that she was being held hostage and she needed help. And so, she was like, I'm being held hostage. Please help me. They won't let me go. And so she gave me her pin location, and I figured it was a setup. So I
Hmm.
contacted the Farmington PD, um, met down the street from where Kyra's location was, and showed him the messages through my messenger. And I told him about what happened with Zach. She was one of the last people that was with him. And,
Hmm.
the fact that she had his phone and everything like that, and how Zach is missing. And, the officer didn't know that Zach was missing. They obviously don't communicate within their own, law enforcement, because he had no idea. But
Hmm.
he went down to the location to where Kyra had pinpointed herself, and he saw Kyra walking down the street with another female. And she was fine. She wasn't being held hostage. And he approached her and says, are you Kyra? Are you okay? Are you being held against your will? She says, no, I'm fine. And he said,
Hmm.
well, why would you tell her that, So she didn't have any answers. The other female got arrested because she had a warrant. So her boyfriend, who was
Okay.
across the street, was really upset because his girlfriend got arrested. So he was taking pictures of our, vehicles and our license plate and a bus, and Kyra was released. She continued walking or whatever, and that was the end of that with Kyra. And so, I I don't know why she would have done such a thing like that unless she was, like I said, trying to set me up.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you mean by that? Set you up?
I feel like she set up Zach um, that night she was with him, the night of July 21st.
You didn't feel comfortable by the story that you were hearing and that the phone was still there and
Yes.
yeah.
Um, it wasn't until later that I was from the other female in that room.
Mhm.
The other female in the room had talked to me and said that Kyra and Zach were arguing and had
Mm.
a physical altercation in the room. And Kyra made a phone call, and during that phone call, she heard Kyra putting the green light out on Zach. And
What do you mean by that, putting the green light? Like telling other
telling
people that
them,
it's okay
telling
to
other
harm
people,
them?
yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, but going back to Saturday, we get home. Um, we go into Sunday. I'm exhausted by Sunday. Um, I'm home, and his dad continued searching. Um, Sunday, we've got our first, word of mouth that Zach was found. That actually was Saturday. Saturday, I get a phone call from a female, and she says, I heard Zach is gone. And I'm like, what? no, he's not. I said, we're still looking for him. And hold on. I said, we're still looking for him. You know, where did you hear this? And then she stopped her conversation and she was like, oh, okay, you know. And that was coming from the other female who was in that hotel room. And her mom, I can't hear you.
It was all me. And I was
Okay.
saying this is before his body was found?
Yeah, so that Saturday, that female, the other female that was in the room with him, you know, she calls me. She says, "I heard Zach is gone." And I'm like, "No, he's not." And so everybody heard it because we had all met at the gas station, and I had her on Bluetooth, and we're like, "No, you know, where did you hear that from?" And so she stopped because her mom works at the hospital, and so her mom must have known. And so that was the end of the conversation. We go into Sunday. Zach's dad continued the search. I stayed home. I was exhausted. We get another phone call that says, you know, there was a body that matches Zach's description. And that was the only information I
Who
had
was
gotten.
that? Who was that call from?
That was from my brother-in-law. He had heard. And I was like, you know, do you have any other information? He says, no, let me find out. So he was trying to get information. We go into Monday and continue looking. That afternoon, brother-in-law contacts me again, and he has a phone number and a name, and says, you know, you need to call OMI in Albuquerque.
Who's at OMI?
They're the ones who, you know, who get
Office
the body.
of the medical examiner, or okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. So I call. It was late in the afternoon. I called OMI of Albuquerque. I asked her, you know, told her who I was, and I says, you know, I'm told that you have my son. And she says, I do have a body we got today.
She
And
couldn't possibly know, though.
and so she says, you know, I described Zach. I described his tattoos, and she says we have a male who fits that description, but we can't confirm until we run his fingerprints. I was willing to drive to Albuquerque that same evening to identify him. She says, no, you know, we'll run his prints. So they found Zach on Saturday. This is
Sunday.
Monday that I'm calling, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
So they had found him not too far, you know, within 20 miles of where he went missing. They had found him. He had made it all the way to Albuquerque or wherever the medical examiner's office had.
on
And
Monday.
no one had called you all yet, or no
Nobody
law
had
enforcement? So it was really you calling the medical examiner based on that suggestion from someone who has nothing to do with law enforcement that got you to find out that your son had been found.
Yes. And
so did you call the police at some point? Were they?
By then I was at the police station, and it was late in the afternoon. They had just closed their office. And so I was checking the doors. I went around. I was banging on the doors because I needed answers. Somebody from the back finally answered. And I said, I need to know what is going on. I said, I just got off the phone with OMI. They're telling me they have my son. I need some answers. You know, I didn't know where to go.
Do you know who found him? Did you ever find out who found him? Was it law enforcement or?
No, it was the landowner's daughter who was running. It had been raining, so she wasn't running for a few days. And it cleared up, and she She ran her normal course and came across Zach's body. He was laying on a dirt road. So she seen him from a distance and she stopped. She didn't want to approach because the area that he was found, people who know of it go there to party. And so she didn't want to approach. She thought maybe he was passed out. She ran back home to dad. Dad sent his son to go check. Son is the one who called it in, and he was deceased. And so that was on the Navajo reservation, and the criminal investigator was there. Navajo Nation PD, basically. I don't know. I don't know if the sheriff's department was there. I don't know who else was there.
It's probably hard to remember. So, fast forward in the story, you've now found him. The police hadn't notified you. The investigation, I assume, unfolds. Who takes the lead? Is it the Navajo Nation at that point because he was found there, or the Farmington police? Or are they all working together, or because it's a murder on the reservation? I know that the FBI then has jurisdiction too. Did they get involved?
Yes, the FBI has jurisdiction over it, so they're the ones handling the case.
Okay. And where does it stand right now? Where does the case stand now?
Right now we're in, going on to 4 years, July 21st, and his case is still unsolved. We are on our second FBI agent as of October 2023. I do communicate with the officer about updates or any new leads that I get. And
I wanted to ask you, so when Zach went missing, to the point that he was found, was there any media coverage of his case at all?
Nothing at all.
Okay. Wow.
The only media attention he got was that missing persons flyer on the Farmington police page.
Facebook page. So, ultimately Zach's case started to get attention. I know after you, I think it sounds like you advocated for him and began advocating for other people. How did that journey begin?
So, after laying Zach to rest, after, the investigators came by to confirm his death, I was told to be quiet, and I honestly didn't know.
Told by who?
By the detective, the investigator, the FBI, And
what do they mean by that? Just not to protect the investigation, or why were they telling you?
I'm assuming to protect the investigation, but when I think back, staying quiet does not protect the investigation. I didn't understand the whole thing. And so that was on a Tuesday that they had confirmed, which was 1 week after Zach's, went missing. And so his dad and I went to bed crying, all these emotions, all these questions that were left unanswered, anger between the two of us, and the blame, game begins that immediately that night. And so,
you mean like you felt like what do you mean by the blame game? Like blaming?
I dropped off Zach. I dropped off Zach at the journey, and with his drug addiction, with his alcohol addiction,
but there's no way.
Lots of finger pointing, like like it was my fault that I allowed him to do that. Zach was an adult, and if I could have locked them up in a room and that way, I would have.
I think
But
most parents would.
yeah, there was no way that he would have, I go to work and his friends would come by. I go to work and he would leave, and so I didn't, half the time I didn't know who was picking him up or dropping him off. Dad
Right.
was home and he would, call me and say, there's a gray car outside. I knew who it was, if he
Right.
would give, because
You're
I was
just
chasing people off, like 2 o'clock in
did
the morning. Yeah.
so in that initial aftermath, you guys, it sounds like you guys were in a lot of pain and sort of like
Mhm.
lashing in whatever direction. When and how did you realize from your perspective that there was something wrong with the way the case was handled?
Well, they didn't give us any answers. I asked how, I asked where. Um, they said it was still an investigation and they couldn't, give me any information.
So they were
So,
unwilling to tell you like the cause of death or any of those things?
nothing.
Okay. How did you eventually find out how he died?
Um, I I found out by his death certificate.
Oh,
We
wow.
had laid back to rest, and even then, um, they wouldn't. The funeral home wouldn't let me dress him. Um, and
Why? Why?
because he was laying in the field for a few days,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
his body had decomposed, and I don't know to what degree. And so I was not allowed to dress my baby. I took his clothes to him, and that's all I could do.
So what was it that led you to was it the lack of details in the investigation or answers? Was there ever a point where his story started to get attention?
Yeah, it was, his death certificate had told me that he had died of gunshot wounds,
Mhm.
not wound, but and so I wasn't hearing from no law enforcement at all. Didn't know who had the case. I tried to
Oh, you
get the
didn't
police
even know
report.
who had the case at that point. Wow.
At that time, I didn't. Yes,
Right.
and so then my mom's the one who watches the news all the time. And she had mentioned Nicole Chavez from Albuquerque,
A
who lost
reporter.
her son.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
gun violence.
Mm.
And Nicole started an organization called Robbed, and she was having a candlelight vigil in Albuquerque. So she says, why don't you go attend that? Maybe you can talk to somebody out there.
Yeah.
So I made a trip to Albuquerque
How
and I
far
got,
is Albuquerque away?
it's 3 hours away.
Okay, wow. So not nearby. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit.
So I got Zach's name on the list and I attended the candlelight vigil on his behalf. It
Mm.
was very emotional. I talked to Bernalillo Sheriff's Department.
Right. That's the local area sheriff's department for.
So I talked to an officer there, and he kind of guided me. And after that, um, I heard about the New Mexico Crusaders for Justice against gun violence.
Mm.
So they were from Albuquerque as well.
How did you ultimately connect with the Petito family?
Um, through Darlene.
Darlene Gomez, the attorney in New Mexico who handles lots of
Yeah,
indigenous
she had
missing
stated that.
murders cases. Yeah.
Yeah, she had stated that the Pepito family contacted her and asked how they could help.
Mm.
And he, mentioned that, we have families that need media attention. Can we share the platform? And
Did
according
that
to Darlene,
surprise
they all,
you? Did that surprise you at all that they were interested in that?
I was very surprised. Darlene said she gave them a list and they chose Zach. And she called me and she says, the Gabby Pepito family want to know if you want to come to Nashville.
Wow.
And I broke down and I cried and I said, yes,
Oh,
yes,
wow. So really, Nashville was the first time on a big stage you told Zach's story.
yes.
Wow. That's so awesome. I'm glad I was there to be among the first to hear it.
Thank you.
That's so awesome. If you were to sort of step back and think about what you sort of hoped and dreamed for the families of other people, who find other, whether they're indigenous or otherwise, who find their, but particularly those who are native, find their loved ones missing. What would you hope for them?
I hope that the officers, law enforcement takes these families serious. Often we get labeled
Mm,
because of their background, their
yeah,
history, their
yeah,
age. You know,
yeah,
they're an adult. They probably just you know left and is what they assume, and so they don't get taken serious when they're filing a missing persons report.
mm,
And you know, I just hope that now that we stand together and support one another, and you know that law enforcement starts doing their jobs and doing better investigations to bring our loved ones home, to help us get justice for those that were murdered.
yeah. It's an yeah. I I just think to myself, like, if if this were a situation with your average white suburban kid where I grew up in Northern Virginia, and actually, I mean, I remember a kid not too long ago who went missing for like 3 hours, and everyone, including the police, were after that. It's just a shame that our socioeconomics, the color of our skin, and all these other factors play a role. And I've been in this interesting set of conversations with people where they've said to me, well, the media is the problem, or the politicians are the problem, or the fill in the blank are the problem. And I've said, no, you're the problem, because it's the politicians that respond to you, it's the media that responds to you. And this is the royal you right now. What can people who have privilege, whether it's because they're white or it's socioeconomic or whatever it is, what can people with privilege do to help in these cases and to help people like you?
Treat us as equal. For one, we bleed the same color. If you want to help out, share our flyers, share our posters.
Sort of sharing the fact that our humanity, I suppose, right? That we're all really just human. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Vangie, I really do appreciate you coming on and taking the time to tell the story. I know it's raw and I know it's new for you to be on the stage, but I think for listeners who hear stories like this, I hope either the stories of people like Zach or mothers like you, that they can find some kind of connection that resonates, or some kind of small thing that they can do to help. And I just can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child, much less two children. So I appreciate your courage and your willingness to come out on the stage, because I don't think a lot of us could do it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, but we're going to stay. You and I are going to stay on the call. I'm going to stop the live. Bye, everyone.